Hello guys, how are we doing and welcome back to the channel. I know it's a little bit long overdue, but today I'm going to be covering the spawn guide for Bounty, which is one of the 2 new maps added to Black Ops 6 Ranked Play last week. In today's video, we're going to be covering where the spawns are, how you can block the spawns, if you spawn somewhere, what does it mean, and more importantly, how you can control the spawns so that you can give yourself the best chance of winning by more, getting more SR, and getting more wins. For those of you who this is your first spawn guide and you're relatively new to the channel, you can check out the other spawn guides down below within the same playlist for all of the other maps. This guide will also be on my Black Ops 6 Ranked Play guide, which you can check out if you want it in a writing format. You're more than welcome to check it out that way, but today we're going to be talking through it, so it's probably best to have that maybe up alongside me talking through it, so that when you're in the middle of a game next time you're on Bounty, you've just got it to refer to on your second monitor, on your phone, whatever. So we're going to be kicking it off with P1. So the spawns on P1 are a little bit bizarre, but if you imagine, I'm going to try and break it down as simply as possible here. So for those of you who don't know Bounty, it's a fairly okay map, but to break it down, what you're seeing here, you've got the main statue with the patio on this right hand side, you've got the little glass paneling where you can fall through the glass at the top, you've got the little sign that you can jump out towards on the bottom, then you've got like the construction sort of area on this left hand side here. We then move a little bit further onto the spawn guide, where essentially on this map mode combo, on the specific hill, the map is pretty much broken into 2 halves. So you've got lockers, grey in platform area in P3, and then on the other side you've got the green statue and zig spawn. So these are 2 halves of spawns, you could say. If an enemy has their team weighted towards a certain side of the map, you will simply spawn the other. Generally speaking, you'll spawn at the spawn that is furthest away from where the enemy team are weighted. And when I say weighted, I mean where most of their team are focused upon the map. So we've got a couple of examples here to hopefully help this become a little bit more logical. So in this example, you've got your teammates pushed up this left-hand side here. So you've still got control of this right-hand side of the map, but you're a little bit pushed towards this left bottom side here, which means the spawn that opens up for the enemies are the spawns back P3. A little bit similar, but slightly different. So you've still got this right-hand side of the map controlled, but you've more got, you've been spawning green, or perhaps you've moved to this right-hand side because you'll maybe rotate to P2. That'll actually spawn the enemies towards lockers because you've got this right-hand side of the map controlled, but you also push towards this top half. So it means the spawn that's safest for the enemies to spawn in are lockers. And then finally, if you've got a fairly balanced approach to the spawn and you've still got this map side of the control, you're going to just spawn the enemy in the middle. Okay, they'll spawn somewhere in the middle. But this is a super simplified version where you've only got 3 on each side. There's probably way more spawns than that on each side. But the more you're weighted towards a certain area, the further, imagine it just the opposite side of the map is probably where the enemies are going to be spawned. But it's not just done on your location, it's done on your team's location. You've got to be very careful and be aware of where your teammates are at all times to know whether or not an enemy is going to be spawning just alongside you, for example. Strategy-wise, the better spawns to this hill are right on the right here towards the P2. There are 3 key routes to the hill, so you can go through this right-hand side here, you can go down the left, or you can hit the middle. Whereas on the other side, you are split into 2 directions. You're either going to P3 and glass side up here, or you hit to this bottom side. There's no middle route to get to P1 from this left-hand side, which means that you're a little bit easier to read. Which, as I say, one of the reasons why I prefer this right-hand side to spawn on. The spawns are also slightly closer to the middle of the map. So it's quicker to get to P1 from these 3 spawn points. And it's also, as you probably noticed, closer towards P2 as well. Now, if you spawn on the this side from the beginning, a little bit of a strategy here, you want to try and keep these spawns if you can, because as I say, it's the better spawns to have. You want to keep these spawns. You want to make sure that you're keeping an eye out for all 3 lanes of traffic to direct traffic into the area of P3. So you really want to push the enemies towards the left here. So throughout P1, if you can prioritize having this left-hand side front control and having maybe someone pull back a bit right here, it will essentially spawn the enemies P3. If we take a quick look at what it was beforehand, if you have a setup that looks a little bit like this, it'll mean that the enemy spawn P3. It means to rotate to P2 or rotate to the hill, they've got to run across this really open lane here. So they're either going to run on top of the lights, through the waterfall, or through glass, which means that all you need is someone on a couple of these headers just looking here, and they've not got much cover. Whereas if you were spawning them lockers, obviously they've got a little bit more cover. They can jump onto the sign out here, and it's a little bit less predictable, which is why, as I say, I prefer as a setup is to have people spawn towards this P3 side when it gets towards the end of P1 rotation. Now, if you don't have these right-hand spawns at the start, you're really important to fight for these, okay? Win the gunfights you need to, and all you really need to do is have any one of your team towards this right-hand side and playing their life around this statue area, because that'll basically spawn the enemies either here or here, and that's where you need to communicate with the rest of the team. Once one of your teammates leaks through towards this right-hand side here, you need to either focus your team towards this locker side or P3 side, because then it will mean the enemy spawns the other side, because what that will be doing is your teammates blocking these 3 spawns, the game's going to go, okay, which one of these spawns are closer or more safe to spawn them on next, and if you're on P3, they're going to be spawning lockers, and you can communicate that to your team. And then you can rotate to P2 with ease. Now, the spawns are a lot easier to understand from here on out. They're a little bit more traditional. The P1 in the middle of the map is always a little bit tricky. So the main spawns areas are patio, and by default, these will be the 2 and P5. Sorry, so patio and P5, and by default, these will be the 2 main spawns. Now, when both of these spawns, are blocked, the tarp spawns open up, and the tarp ones are all the way to the top left here, miles away from P2, but it is close to P3. Now, when tarp spawns open up, the team spawning that side tends to push through lights, they'll push through glass and push this top side of the hill, and that'll tend to spawn the other team all the way down at the wine, because patio is a little bit close. If you've got a team spawning tarp and they're running forward off the hill towards P2, this is a little bit closer than spawn. So the enemies, if the game essentially says, okay, we've got people running towards this area, we're going to spawn you here rather than here. So that's why sometimes you might spawn wine in this situation. Now, in order to block the patio and wine spawns, because you really want to keep these right-hand spawns here, they're super effective to have these. You can see how close they are to the objective. You can see how far you can spawn out if you don't have these spawns. In order to block the enemy from spawning here, you simply need to be in the statue area of the map. Be in this general vicinity and you'll block both of these spawns. The game will then look to spawn the enemy P5 or tarp. If P5 is blocked, which can be done by being pushed through towards middle, towards this T-zone here, this blue shaded area, the next spawn will, as I say, the game will use is tarp. Interestingly, on this hill, on this map, there's this real open middle lane here. That means that if you can somehow spawn the enemies the other side of this middle lane, you can have someone dedicated to watching this cross and getting all the information and potentially cutting off the whole map with all of the kills coming their way. So it's real. That's why it's so important to have these the spawns the other side of the hill, on the same side of the hill. Now let's go through some scenarios so you can imagine yourself in the game. I've spawned somewhere, what does it mean? So if you spawn patio, it simply means the enemies are the other side of P2 and are likely to have control of this left-hand side here. So it's nothing too much to worry about. Now, if you spawn wine, it means the enemy has control of the P3 side of the map, but have the emphasis towards this top side of the map here. So they're towards glass or light. So the game's gone, okay, patio is a little bit too close. I'm going to spawn you wine as a result. Now, if you spawn P5, it simply means the enemy's team are blocking patio and wine, and therefore have that right-hand side control of the map, so you've just spawned the other side, and that's the first default spawn for this left-hand side of the map. Now, if you spawn tarp, which you want to avoid at all costs, it means the enemy have control of this patio side, but also have somebody pushed up this left-hand side a little bit more, so you can't spawn here because it's deemed unsafe by the game, so you've spawned all the way back here, which is obviously the spawn you do not want to obtain because it's so far away from P2. Now, in an ideal setup, you'd have someone on your team blocking the patio spawns by being in the statue area. Then you'd have 1 or 2 players on your team pushed out towards the middle T's, like holding this middle lane cross zone. And then finally, you could have someone on the hill. And that is a real efficient way to just get the most amount of hill time from P2. Now, obviously, when it gets to the end of P2, you'll notice how close tarp spawns are to P3. What you need to do is release the block. When there's 20, 30 seconds left of P2, release the block, allow the enemies to spawn here. So you're spawning here, and that will mean you can rotate to P3 a lot more effectively with a lot more ease. So for P3, that's in this little boardroom area here. The default spawn for P3 is either AC or tarp. So this backside are the default spawns. So you need to make sure that you're blocking these at all time. If you do not block this spawn, this back left-hand side spawn here, the enemies will spawn behind you. So you need to be very careful that you're doing that. Otherwise, the enemies are just going to leak through. You're going to hear someone on your team going, "Oh, they've shot me from behind. Have they spawned in?" And they're just simply going to spawn there if you're not blocking it. So you need someone dedicated to that. The default spawn on the other side of the map is P4, which is just up here, and the alternative spawn for P4 is the green steps or catwalk. Okay, so yeah, group these into two. Essentially, you need to block this left-hand side to spawn them out, and then if you the two spawns for them being out are these two spawns here. Now, talking of blocking, you can block the pink spawns by being in P3 or over this light-hand side, so being like towards the front of P3 generally, and that will block this pink spawn. And that will essentially cause the default player for the next person to spawn in, whatever team it is, to be spawning back here. Okay, so it's why you can't just rely on blocking this type. You need to be pushed a little bit further through to block this yellow spawn as well. And that'll essentially mean any kills you get when these two spawns are blocked will spawn the enemy all the way out over here, which is what you're trying to achieve. Now you can block AC by being towards the plat or in this construction area towards this grey zone. And now whilst one team is blocking yellow or pink, either of these two spawns, the other team will be spawning P4 by default, as we've just said. However, you can also block the P4 spawns by having someone on your team push through P3 slightly, maybe in towards glass or maybe towards the waterfalls. And then that will spawn the enemies all the way over towards catwalk, which is what you want to try and achieve throughout P3. Now, let's take again some scenarios. Now, if you find yourself spawning pink, it likely means the enemy has no control of your side of the map whatsoever, and you can probably get to the hill fairly easily. They might have a line of sight down this long area here over the lights, but generally speaking, you're probably in a good position to get to P3 if you spawn pink. If you spawn yellow, if you spawn towards this AC zone here, it means the enemy have control of the other side of the map, but they're either pushed on P3 itself, which you'll obviously know because you'll see that they're on the hill, or they're pushed over towards your side lights. Otherwise, you're just spawned here. So if you spawn here, that's what it means. Now, if you happen to spawn P4 all the way over in this blue circle, it means the enemies are blocking the AC and TARP spawns, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't really tell you anything else other than that the enemy has control of this area here, or at least one enemy has control of this area here. Now, if you spawn catwalk, you're pretty screwed. It basically means the enemies are blocking both these two back spawns and push through P3 slightly, blocking this blue spawn. This can sometimes happen if by mistake of the enemies, if one of them spawned blue or spawned P4 and they're just running forward to the hill, you've then spawned in while someone's blocking, you've just spawned here because they're so close to this or coming off P4, you spawn behind them. It's a little bit difficult to understand, but it should be fairly self-explanatory after a few reps and having this up on your screen when you are playing the game itself. So strategy-wise, you really need to fight for this AC side of the map, and once your team are in the hill and getting the kills, you need to then start to try and push towards P4. Once this happens, you need to try and keep a teammate blocking, but you can have someone push through P3, as I say, spawning the enemy at the furthest possible spawn from the objective, which is this cat green steps area over here. You then need someone collecting the hill time and can have another player maybe in P1 cutting the map, making sure the enemies can't run across to P3 with absolute ease. So in short, you need someone blocking these back spawns. They'll spawn here, but if you want to be a little bit more aggressive, you can push a little bit through. It will stop them from spawning here, but they'll spawn here. Okay, and that's how it will work, but you need someone blocking this P3, otherwise they're going to spawn behind you. Moving towards P4 now, the spawns work similar to how they did on P3, in that you need someone actively blocking to stop the enemy from spawning in back here. Now, as I say, these are the beneficial spawns to have. But yeah, with no pressure from either team, the two default spawns, the two main spawns, are going to be catwalk and the P3 plat area, this blue circle here. However, wine is an alternative spawn for catwalk, and lockers is the alternative spawn for this P3 plat spawn, okay? Now, to block, you can block cat, you can block this really close pink spawn by being in P4 itself, or pushed up towards this waterfall, and that's going to deem an enemy too close to you, or too close to, you're going to be too close to have the enemy spawn here, and that'll essentially make the game look to spawn them out at wine. In order to block wine as well, which you're going to want to do if you want these right-hand side spawns, you need to have this general control of the statue area of the map. You can have someone in L, but being generally in this vicinity will block both of these spawns and spawn the enemy either here or here, depending on where the rest of your team are positioned. Now, if you block cat and wine, the enemies, as I say, will spawn P3 and platform, but you can also block P3 and platform spawns by being pushed up this side towards P4. You can be in lights, you can be like glass, you can be in that general area, and that'll essentially spawn the enemies all the way over here towards lockers, which you're going to want to try and achieve again because it's so far away from P4, and they've got to run across all this map to get towards the objective, rather than all three of the other spawns are relatively close and arguably easy to defend the hill from, or hard to defend the hill from. But you know, if you have the enemy team spawning out of lockers, you're in for a good journey. So again, let's go through some scenarios. If you spawn catwalk, it just means the enemy have P3 side of the map controlled, this left-hand side here, and have very little pressure towards P4 itself. If you spawn wine, it means the enemy still has this left-hand side of the map controlled, but they're a little bit pushed up towards this P4 side. Maybe they've gone through green, or maybe there's pressure towards this upper side of the map here, and you spawn down here as a result. Now, if you find yourself spawning P3 and plat, it simply means the enemies are blocking statue and have not pushed towards this left-hand side of P4. So they're just, you know, maybe they've just spawned in, maybe they're just blocking and they're happy to sit on time, but they wouldn't have pushed through any further towards your spawn than P4, and as a result, you spawned over towards the P3 plat area. Now, in the unfortunate circumstance you find yourself spawning in lockers, it essentially means the enemies are blocking statues and they have pushed towards the P3 plat spawn, and essentially that's why you haven't spawned here, here, or here, because they're blocking statue and they're pushed through this area. So the game spawned you lockers to be super, super safe. Now, strategy-wise, it goes without saying that you really want to obtain the statue side of the map and block both of these spawns on this side. So you can have one person do that. You don't need two people blocking two spawns. You can have one person blocking both by being in the statues area of the map. You'll then need someone obtaining hill time, of course. And the other two players can then focus on spawning the enemy's lockers and then playing the cuts off of lockers. So one blocking these spawns, one on hill time, one maybe push waterfall or on this glass heady, and the other one also doing that sort of position but watching the cross as well. And this one player can be watching up, one player can be watching down, but that's how you're going to be able to lock down the map. What is important is that people, even though you're blocking, it doesn't mean the enemies, there is always going to be an emergency spawn. So if you say you're blocking these two spawns and your teammates go, great, I can push any spawn I want, and they go right into the spawn and they get right into that spawn, the game is going to look for an emergency spawn, which could be further back, but it also could be right behind you. So you really want to control your teammates to make sure that you are leaving one spawn open so it's a readable spawn. Moving on to P5, a really simple spawn system for P5. I've got to be honest, this is really quite easy to understand and hopefully easy to learn from you guys. The main spawns here are grey, or like back in this construction zone, and zig. The grey spawn is used when the opposing team are this right hand side of P5 and your team has this, or when your team has this area of the map controlled. The game will then use the zig spawn as an alternative, and then bar when the other two spawns are blocked. Now, you want to avoid spawning at bar at all costs, because you can see it's an absolute trek towards the objective, and obviously you're going to want the enemies to be spawning here, because it's going to, every kill you get while the enemies are spawning here takes, you know, it makes so much more difference if they're spawning here than they are here or here. Okay, so you really want to try and drive the enemy to be spawning here, and we're going to be going through how you can do that in a second. So the grey spawns, this spawn back construction, whatever you want to call it, back here, are super, super, super easy to block. You only need to be on the top side of P5, this upper side of P5, to be blocking their spawn. Okay, that's why it's super easy. You don't even have to be pushed to the objective to be blocking that spawn. You simply need to be on this top side of P5, or obviously push through the objective to be blocking this pink spawn here. Okay, and that's why it's fairly important. That's why it's very important that those defending these spawns actually push through the objective. Because if you just sit on the hill and you try and take those kills and you somehow lose the kills and you lose the gunfights, you're just going to spawn out by default, because the enemies are going to be in this zone and therefore blocking this pink spawn back here, this grey area of the map. So what you want to do is obviously push through the spawn and take the gunfights to them, rather than wait for them to take the gunfights to you, because otherwise you're going to just spawn out and it's going to be a tricky time. Obviously pushing through P5 will also block the back spawns, as we said. Zig spawns, however, can be blocked by pushing towards this T zone or this mid area of the map, or pushing Zig itself, and then the game will basically spawn the enemies all the way over in this bar area. If you've got one person blocking this, one person blocking here, and then you can basically play off their cuts. You can watch them either if they come around this left hand side, you can have someone watching that, or if they go through the top, you can have someone watching that as well. Again, let's go through some scenarios for P5 on Bounty. If you spawn in the grey zone, or this pink circle, it simply means the enemies have left this spawn available and are at most pushed towards the front of P5. They're no further forward than this line here, this sort of zone here. If they were around here, you'd spawn out. If they were pushed up towards the top of P5, you'd spawn out. If they were over here, you'd spawn out. So it simply means the enemies have no aggression towards you whatsoever, or your team are doing a really good job of defending it. If you spawn Zig, it simply means the enemies are the top side of P5 or have pushed through the grey area side of the objective and they're blocking this pink zone. Okay, so if you spawn here, it means the enemies are somewhat in this vicinity. Now, if you, as I say, are unfortunate enough to spawn all the way at the bar over here, it means both of the other two spawns are blocked. So be careful running out of the objective, because it could mean that someone's sat in the Zig just waiting for your cut, waiting, like holding your cut, waiting for you to run out of your spawn. Now, strategy-wise, obviously you want to try and obtain these grey spawns. The person on the objective can be the person blocking the spawn as well. If they're on the hill, they can be sat at the top side of the hill blocking this zone. One other player in the team can be pushed through T, blocking Zig, and then the other two players can simply focus on helping the other two or playing the cuts off this bar spawn. They spawn bar, they're going to either run all the way around to Zig, they can run right. So you're going to want players sat up top here watching this top bar area. You're going to want a player on the side watching this right hand side, but you want to make sure that those two players are playing wherever the other two aren't watching, okay? And that should give you the best chance of winning and getting the most hill time on P5. So that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. Any questions, leave them down below in the comments and I will answer them very, very shortly. And enjoy the rest of your day. Ciao for now.